I just want to say by way of introduction, there's a phrase or a saying that those who say it can't be done ought to get out of the way of those who are already doing it. And this is exactly, I feel, about the Khan Academy and the work that you and your colleagues in Salon have developed. And I want to say that the founder of the Khan Academy, Sal Khan, has written two books that are very well worth reading. The One World Schoolhouse and Brave New Words, Brave New Words on how AI is going to revolutionize education. And I think they're both excellent books and worth reading. And so, just by way of introduction, Kristen is Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy and is going to share more about the Academy, and then we agreed on a few questions and welcome any from you all who are still here. So Kristen, let me turn it over to you, and thank you very much for getting up early and presenting to us.
Great, thank you. I'm going to do about 15 minutes of presentation or so, and then we'll switch to Q&A. We've got some, things that we might talk about in that section, but happy to get questions from you as well. Yes, so I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy. I lead our teams that build and design, most of what you see on the Khan Academy website. If you're not familiar, Khan Academy is a nonprofit. We have a mission to provide a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere. And so we have about 12 to 15 million learners a month who come to our site for practice on, we are known for math and science, but we also have a lot of other topics from financial literacy to things like world history, lots of different areas for students to explore. In March of 2023, we launched a tool on Khan Academy that we call Khanmigo. Khanmigo is an AI-powered tutor for students and assistant for teachers, and that's what I'm mostly going to talk about today. My background's in educational psychology. That's what my PhD is in, and so I come from that kind of lens of what do we know about student learning, and then how might these new technology tools help us solve some of the problems that we have faced over years and years in working to educate more students. So that said, it is also the case that if you are feeling a little skeptical right now about how technology is going to change teaching, that's a reasonable thing to feel. This picture that I have on this slide is a machine that was invented by someone named Sidney Pressey in 1925. And this was going to be the machine that was going to change learning for students. You may think, we don't have one of these machines in every classroom for every student. Maybe this promise did not come to fruition, and the same can hold true for many of the technology advances that we've seen. So I'll talk a little bit about why I think AI might be different this time, but also why we should have some, cautious optimism, not just, blind faith that this is going to be the thing. A little bit about this machine. If you look at it, there's a roller. That big roller across contains multiple choice questions. And students would use those levers over on the right, you can see 4 of them to indicate which answer they thought was right. And they get the feedback immediately if they're right or wrong. But in the back, there's a setting. And that if you get so many questions in a row right, that little chute on the front spits out candy. If that's not a good machine, get some of our behavioral principles in effect. I'm trying to see if I can hook up my laptop to work on the same principles. But the main point being that there's been a lot of attempts to use technology to help improve learning. And in many cases, they have fallen flat of their expectations. So understood, if we think, what's different about AI? What might we think about that is different in how things sit? Well, the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit more about learning. So there are decades and decades of research about how people learn, how we remember things, how we recall things. There are a few areas that are targeted in our spaces at Khan Academy as we start to think about what are some of the challenges that technology might help us with. But we know first that students learn more when first they're actively engaged with the material. Now, that doesn't mean engaged like engaged, clicking a lot of buttons. It means cognitively engaged. So they're thinking about the material, they're connecting it to what they already know, they're making new linkages, they're asking questions. All right, how do we keep students actively cognitively engaged with the material? Second, we know that students are learning when they're just at the edge of what they can do, and they likely need a little bit of support to be successful. If you're working on something and you can do it without any support, you're probably not learning something new. Now, you may be reviewing what you already know, which is good to do, but it's probably not something you're just learning. When you're just learning, you need a little bit of support, but that's really difficult for a single teacher in a primary or secondary school who has 25, 30 students. How do they give that little bit of support when the student needs it? And we're talking about post-secondary. How do we think about that actually working with professors? We just expect students to find that little bit of support on their own. Third, we know that immediate feedback on responses to new material is really important when you're just starting to learn something new. How do we get students immediate feedback? Well, in math, we've kind of been doing that at Khan Academy. Every time you answer a question, you get some response. Even in that 1925 machine, you got some immediate feedback and you got some candy. But let's think about other things. Let's think about writing. It's really difficult to get immediate feedback on writing. And in fact, usually what happens is you turn in a paper that you've written, and as a student, you wait a week, 10 days, 2 weeks to get feedback back on the paper, by which time you've kind of forgotten what you were wrestling with as you were writing it, and you look at the grade on top and put it away. On the other hand, if you're a teacher, you're faced with a huge stack of these essays that you need to give feedback on, and are spending your weekends and evenings giving all of that feedback. So that immediate feedback is also sometimes a struggle. And we started to think, can we use technology to help work with that? And finally, seeing value in what you're learning is important. And so with that, it's thinking about, well, what do I value? And we know from motivation theory, there's something called expectancy value theory. You tend to do more of something if, one, you expect you're going to be successful at it, and two, you value it. So how do we help people see the value in what they're doing and what that looks like? So these are all some of the ideas about learning that we then turn to our AI tools and say, hey, how might AI help us keep students cognitively engaged, give them a little bit of support when they need it, give them immediate feedback, and help them see the value in what they're doing. So that is what we looked at. Let me switch over here and give you a little bit of a demonstration of what the AI looks like here. So I'm going to go over, this is Khan Academy's list of courses here. Algebra 1 is our most commonly used course. This is at the front here, every student has a little dashboard of this is each skill in the course. You can see combining like terms, equivalent expressions, etc. And as students move through the exercises and get quite more and more questions right, they move from attempted to familiar to proficient to mastered. So that's just what you're seeing here with all of these squares is a mechanism that we use to give students a way to track what they're doing. But we are interested in the AI piece. So this is a usual exercise, equations with variables on both sides that I might see as a student. This little icon over here is Conmigo. And so if I pop up Conmigo, and I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger here so you can see what Conmigo is saying. So if I am a student and I want to talk about this piece that I'm working on, Conmigo first says, I'm here to help you with this exercise. Even though I'm getting better every day, I can still make mistakes. This happens most when I'm evaluating your responses. So don't rely only on what I say. Here are a few things that you can ask. Help me solve this. Try a similar example. Why should I care about learning this? I can also just say, I'm stuck. Now, what's happening here is it's taking what I've said. It's also taking the problem that I'm working on, the answer to that problem, because we know the answer to this problem. We wrote this problem. We have a whole hint series about this problem. So it takes all of that and it gives that to the models. And then it gives about 500 words. It's the prompt that we've written to tell it how to act like a tutor. Because if you just gave this problem to ChatGPT, it would just give you the answer. It would, here's all the steps and here's the answer. Here's what Conmigo says instead. No worries, let's break it down. What do you think is the first step to solve this equation? I'm just going to say, can you just give me the answer? So again, we're sending messages to right now we are working on one of OpenAI. If you're familiar with the AI space, OpenAI is one of the big foundational model creators. We pass this to their models. It passes back. I can't give you the answer, but I can help you find it. Let's start by simplifying both sides of the equation. What do you get when you combine like terms on the left side? So again, it's going to walk me through that piece. When I talked about getting that support, getting that little bit of support, that's what's happening here. All right, I'm going to jump out of here and I'm going to go over to our writing tutor because I want to show you that before we get to talking more broadly about some of the issues around AI in education. So for students, we have a number of activities that are available for students. And of course, because I'm doing a live demo, it's going to spin here for a minute. And what we are thinking about with students, we have, if they are not working on a Khan Academy problem, for example, if they are working instead on their own math problems, they can bring those and get tutoring in STEM. Oh, we're going to hang up here. Let's see if we can. I'm going to go to the teacher dashboard first. There we go. On the teacher side, we also have about 30 different activities for teachers. Everything from help write a lesson plan to what's that lesson hook. What are you going to do in your first 5 minutes of class that's going to activate the students' prior knowledge, that's going to help them get curious and excited about the topic of the day. You can brainstorm those. Writing letters of recommendation, text levelers, so that you can take some text and make it easier or help students be able to access some of the written content if they don't have the reading skills to do it. A number of teacher activities here. These mostly come when we first launched Conmigo. We had about 5 of these, and then every time we talk to teachers, they give us more things they want it to do, and so we create a bunch of new activities that are aligned to what the teachers have told us they want to do. Let's see if I can get back to writing coach here. Yeah, we're going to spin. All right, so the idea behind writing coach is that we want to make sure that students are getting support in writing without actually having the ability to cheat, which is of course one of the big concerns we hear. So this is an essay about daylight savings time. I happen to live in Arizona, and Arizona is the only state. Arizona and Hawaii are the only states in the United States that don't observe daylight savings time. Little fun fact for you. But this teacher has assigned an essay asking students to write a persuasive essay in which you argue for or against the observance of daylight savings time. And you can see here the requirements for this essay, etc. The student can talk to Conmigo about the assignment itself. So here it's explain the essay type, and Conmigo talks about what a persuasive essay is. The student can then move to outlining, where they outline their thesis and claim, their main point of their first paragraph, evidence, the source of that evidence, etc. Then they can go to drafting, where they are able to see their outline over here on the right, and they start to draft their essay on the left. And then finally, revising. So here is where the power of the AI comes in. So I've written a draft of my essay. Conmigo looks at 5 different elements: the introduction, the evidence and reasoning, the structure, the conclusion, and the style and tone. And for each of these, the number in parentheses here is the number of comments that it has. So if we click over to evidence and reasoning, for example, we can click here to the second piece. In the second paragraph, the evidence from the US Department of Energy is introduced abruptly. Can you add some context to explain why this evidence is relevant to your argument about energy savings? So it's underlined the sentence here that it's talking about. Now, if I want to, I can go and continue to I can ask Conmigo to give me an example of doing that. Give me an example of looking at that, adding some context to explain my evidence. So it says, sure thing. Let's say you're writing an essay about the benefits of exercise. If you introduce a statistic like this one, you might add context explaining why the statistic is important. For example, you could mention how reducing chronic diseases can lead to a healthier population. This helps your reader understand why the statistic is relevant to your argument. Okay, so now I, as a student, can come over here and I can make changes and edit right here if I want to. Make a change here, etc. I can then ask Conmigo to review it and see if it's improved. I can ask them to move on and give me the next piece of feedback, which again, now we're going to go to the third paragraph, which it highlights, etc. So again, you can see in real time, I'm getting feedback on my writing. I'm not grading it. I'm not assigning a grade. But as students are drafting and getting feedback, they're able to then get some of this without, again, waiting for a week, 10 days to get some feedback on their writing of what they're doing. So that's a little bit of the writing piece of what we're doing. And the fun thing is actually, so we're doing, I don't know when folks, if they're watching this on the recording, might be jumping in. Today is December 10th. This past Sunday, actually 60 Minutes in the United States did a story on Conmigo, and Anderson Cooper, who's a well-known anchor, brought his own essay from when he was in middle school, and Conmigo gave him feedback on his middle school essay, and he quite enjoyed that. And one of the things that he did was took a paragraph from someplace else and just pasted it in to the conversation or to the essay that he was writing. And what happens is the teachers then have a view into the chat history of the student. So if I go over to my chat history here, here's, for example, the chat we just did. Remember, we just did that math chat. I said, I'm stuck. It said, let's break it down. I said, can you give me the answer? So this chat history is always available. And as a student, if I, for example, paste something in, it's just going to flag that to the teacher. And what it did and in the demo this weekend was it flagged, oh, Anderson Cooper pasted in 66 words from an external source as he was editing this. Now, maybe that's fine. That could be, hey, he was working over in a Google Doc and pasted it in, but it then gives the teacher something. It highlights those words for the teacher so that they can investigate it and make a judgment for themselves. So there's a little bit here to also provide guardrails and safety nets around what the students are doing as they work on with the AI as they're developing their essays and any other work that they're doing on the site. So with that, I will pause here and stop sharing and just open it up. I know, Ralph, we talked about having some Q&A and seeing what folks are interested in.
This is great. This is great. I'm going to start with a question about content. Different states and different countries have a different spin on history. Let's just take it, social studies, or how to treat certain sensitive topics, sexuality, gender, things like that. How do you address the content to assure the variability that might occur and the controversy that occurs over content? And certainly in math and science, one could argue it's more direct and clear, but social science, history, psychology, other topics could be much more controversial. how do you address the content development, particularly as you move up into higher grade level?
Yes, so a good question. And this is actually unrelated to what we're using AI for. As we develop our courses, our content creators are always aligning our courses to standards. So the courses are aligned to whatever standards there are. Generally, our US content team is creating our first courses in like as you said, in math, it's somewhat easier, but still not. So in math, we have our general courses are aligned to in the US what's called the Common Core, but there are a number of states that don't adopt the Common Core. So for example, Florida, Texas each have their own version of standards that they teach. And it can be as simple as in Common Core, they introduce fractions with denominators from 1 to 10, or maybe 1 to 5. And then in another state will say, actually, when we introduce fractions, we just start with denominators of 1, 2, and 4. And then we move on to what that is. And so the differences can be pretty subtle. But if you're teaching in that state at that grade level, that's prescribed of what to do. And so we have a number of things there where we create kind of a superset in that math system, where we then are using tagging to tag items and lessons based on particular standards and sets of standards. Now, when we start talking about history, those kinds of, more subjective, for lack of a better word, topics, there aren't even in the US, there are not agreed upon standards. But we usually use some set of standards to base what we're doing on and go from there. So whether that's in the US advanced placement standards or what that looks like. We then also, as part of Khan Academy, we are translated into 50 languages. That happens through the efforts of Khan Academy advocates, who are volunteers around the world who not only translate but localize our content into particular countries and languages and where that is. And those folks also then do some of that translation and work to bring the content to the standards of that locality and geography and where things sit. Now, that said, there's always going to be disagreements about how things are taught and where they are. We have a set of guidelines that we try to adhere to about what is, agreement among experts, where we can rely on scientifically generated things. I actually just jumped in on the last call, and someone I heard say that they are forbidden from teaching evolution in Florida. That's actually not the case. But we do think about things like evolution and intelligent design. How do we, where do we, what do we put in our courses for those topics? We put in science courses the scientific consensus, not what other folks see as theories and where those sit. So it's a constant conversation we're having. It is definitely in these political times, not an easy tightrope to walk, to be able to figure out where that content should come down on.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you about the primary risks and challenges in adapting AI for the ego. There's a lot of talk about hallucinations, false information, gender, that the large language models that ChatGPT is based on sometimes can deal with, has inadequate or incomplete information about diversity and in terms of images. So there's been a lot of work on the equity issues as well as hallucinations and false information. So how do you know what you're getting coming out of these interactions? It seems like you can't prescribe every one of them.
Absolutely. So The challenge is not only can we not test every possible question, you can't just give it a question once and get it the answer and check the answer, because it's a probabilistic model. That means that if I ask it the same question 10 times, I'm actually going to get 10 slightly varying answers. So it isn't just that, oh, you can ask it every question and see if it's right or not. It's that you have to ask it questions many, many times. And that's just not a possible task for these. So our solution to this has come in 3 buckets. One is doing things where accuracy is known and possible to know, and how we then try to make it more accurate. So I'll talk about that. Second is doing the thinking about where the where accuracy is subjective and what's right and not, and how we then have it be able to offer both of the multiple options and responses, things like that. And then third is, how do we educate users to the limitations of the tool? So on accuracy first, let's take the basic math accuracy. So math does have clear answers and not, but large language models are not calculators. They're not actually meant to be able to calculate. They're just giving you the probability, the most probable next thing. So because of that, we have done a number of things to increase the accuracy in math. So one is, when I was doing that math problem, you may have seen for a minute it said calculating. What's happening is, when we detect a math problem being done, we send it out to a Python-based calculator. So instead of going through to get the answer from the large language model, we send it to a calculator that then gives that answer back to the large language model to make it more accurate. I also talked about how we send it the answer to the question and our hint steps. So the model isn't just spitting those back to the student, but it has those and is able to draw on those for its responses to the student. So those are things that we do to then increase the accuracy. We also want to be able to test the accuracy. So we have created an evaluation data set, for example, that has a whole bunch of sample conversations that we run through these models. So when a new model comes out, if you're in the AI space, these big foundational models, there's new versions of them getting released all the time. So we want to test them to see how good they are at tutoring math. So we have a whole sample of conversations that we can test the models with and see what percent of these conversations do they do the right thing in. Do they correctly evaluate the student work, whether that step is right or wrong, for example. So all of those things are things we do even just on the math side to make the math more accurate as it's moving, as students are engaging with it and working through it. Second, you mentioned the issues of bias in the models and how where that comes in. There's an interesting conversation here that I like to provoke people to think about. We have 2 conflicting values in this space. One is data privacy, and the second is unbiased models. And those things can be in conflict with each other, because when we go, for instance, to a school district and talk to them about using Conmigo tools, we can tell them, your data will not be used to train these models. And that's what folks want to hear, because they want their data to be private. It sounds scary if you're thinking the things that I type in here would be used to train the models and make, what does my data look like in there? How does that happen? So that's what schools generally want to hear, that their data won't be used to train the models. On the other hand, these models would be a lot better and more unbiased if they had data from more diverse users in them. So we need to figure out how to address that tension. What are the things that we can do to anonymize data, to make it so that, hey, this part of your conversation about solving this math problem is going to be combined with, a million other conversations to help this get better at tutoring, for example. But it won't be any of your personally identifiable information. It won't be anything about you that can be tied to you, those kinds of things. But those are nuanced conversations to have. And we want to think about how do we give still, even in that case, give people the option about what they want to do. But if we're going to have models that are better at representing the world that we live in, we need more diverse data to be part of them and part of their training. And then finally is the AI literacy piece. So again, when you saw the Conmigo demo there, it says, up front, hey, I may be wrong. Don't rely on me as your only source of information. We do a lot of work with teachers to help them think about how they can help their students understand. Teachers always tell their students, check your work. What does that mean to check your work when you're working with an AI, and that you still need to be doing that? It's not the expert, it's actually your helper. And how you start thinking about that mindset as opposed to the mindset of, oh, here's where, all of the answers are.
Another question, thank you. It shows how the complexity of building the database without violating the privacy. Digital divide is very real. And notwithstanding well, it's not even universal access to the internet, even in well-developed countries, particularly in rural areas. Are we dealing with the digital divide and the issue of getting access to communities that are typically underserved?
Yes. So this is a question close to our hearts. As you know, Khan Academy content is always free to teachers and students around the world. And so the question has become, what about the AI space, and what about AI tutors? And unfortunately, these AI models have costs that are associated with them, that not just for us doing all of that work that I just described around building these tools, but literally every back and forth from a student or a teacher to the model is broken down into what they call tokens, which are basically pieces of data. And there is a computing cost for every token that goes back and forth into these models and back out of them. And so for us, the question has been, how do we bring this to as many people as possible while not bankrupting Khan Academy? We don't want the headline AI bankrupts Khan Academy. So thinking about how that looks and what we can do, for example, last spring, Microsoft put up their hands and said, we will fund all of the teacher tools being freely available to teachers. And so that opened up for us the ability, like I said, to make that whole suite of teacher tools available to teachers globally. We still are working on getting them in languages other than English. Like that lesson planning tool required some translation and localization and working on some of those, but we're in about 44 countries right now. And again, free for teachers. Then what about students? So the other piece that we see with thinking about this first on the student side is thinking about, again, how other organizations can cover the cost. Even in the States, this is an issue. Like the digital divide between communities just in the United States is significant and large. And there we've seen some state governments fund the use of AI tutors for districts. And so a school district can then sign up for funding from the state to get and implement AI tutors in their schools. So we find that the using and working through the systems that are already in place, governments and schools, are the best ways to get these tools into the hands of the kids that need them the most. Because if we just go kind of direct to user, it's not the kids that need it the most that are going to be using it. It's going to be the kids that already have access that are going to be diving in and finding it and getting online. So we find generally that, thinking about how we can use our existing systems to help make sure that this is getting in everyone's hands has been the way that we've approached helping close some of that digital divide.
I can see if it's not put in the hands of those who need it the most, it will exacerbate the digital divide. A very real risk. The other question, Gary, here.
Hi, Kristen, thank you for really informative presentation. I do have a couple of questions. One particular, we're one of the things in the work of the Academy when we're looking at global issues is that we find almost nothing can be properly described or explained when we look at it from a narrow disciplinary perspective. Everything is connected across the disciplines. And take something pretty obvious is the connection between weather and the botanical life on the ground, or the behavior of human beings, or the laws, or economic incentives. These are all, but traditionally anyway, until recently, these things were all taught separately in different disciplines. And one of the things we're moving towards is the hope that that the AI can help us overcome the disciplinary silos. And I'm wondering, in your experience, in using it in instruction, I don't know how it's organized, and whether the system has access to the knowledge from all disciplines, or only of the knowledge, let's say it's an arithmetic problem or an algebra problem. Does your present system, or do you see the potential that using the Conmigo, we could be overcoming this narrow disciplinary effects because the system doesn't have the same barriers and limitations that we do when in traditional academic education. I hope my question is clear.
Yes, yes. So it's clear, but it's got I think, a difficult answer. So AI could certainly do that. These models can have conversations with you. They are not siloed by discipline. The models themselves can talk about pretty much anything and talk about it broadly. Give the examples you gave, that could certainly, work through those. The difficulty, and why even in our application of it, we are often narrowing it to a discipline, is that, as I said, we want to be in schools because we think schools are the best place to get this in the hands of kids who need it. Schools are still set up very much in disciplinary silos. And in fact, when you think about there's concepts of like staying on task in things in schools, and that often means staying in that disciplinary silo. So I think your question about how we change and work more interdisciplinary and have those broader conversations is also about a little bit disrupting school and the way things are done. Now, can an education technology system disrupt school? I would point you to a book actually by Justin Reich called Failure to Disrupt, which it goes back to the initial thing that the initial slide that I showed in my talk, which is there's a long history of educational technologists coming in and trying to disrupt schools, and that has not happened at this point. So I'm not sure the driver for that, interdisciplinary world you envision, which is certainly appealing, is going to be a technology. I think that it may rest in other places, but the technology could work that way if we wanted it to.
Fair enough. I do have one last question, and that is, one of our goals is to see about whether AI with other technology like the internet or other technologies could provide universal access in those areas around the world, particularly lesser developed countries, where education and availability of teachers is so much less than what we have in the developed countries. And it does seem to me that Economigo provides something that could be, particularly at the lower grade levels, on its own, full curricula that might be supported by teachers, but where they're not available, there is the, the whole the computer in the wall that one applies. There are those instances where students can learn on their own curiosity. Do you envision a possibility that Khan Academy could develop full curricula or make them available? Should that be interested in something to that effect?
Yeah, so I think, in very often when I'm in conversations, people are talking about, well, how does this technology compare to a teacher? But in fact, in the places where there aren't good teachers, this technology, I think, could shine and has a lot of potential, and places where it's not, trying to do what the teacher's doing, is trying to do what no one is doing right now. So I think that there's certainly potential there. I think the potential to generate content is huge. Sal thinks that in the not distant future, you will just be able to type, make a Sal Khan style video about this topic, and it'll make something that sounds just like what Sal sounds like and uses his style of explaining things. And there's a video about whatever the topic is that you're looking for. And the process of content creation will be much smoother and faster and potentially more personalized, because you could also say, make it about this topic and also include these issues that are relevant in my geography or where I am and what that looks like. So I do think that there's a lot of potential for that in the coming years, as particularly the models. The folks that I talk to and who are making these models say, remember, the models we see right now are the worst models we're ever going to have. They're only going to get better than what we see right now. And we've seen that even over the last 18 months, that the models improve and improve. So I think as they get better, we will see reductions in some of the errors that we're seeing now. Probably not eliminating them, because there is a bit about how these systems work that we're going to need to think about those mistakes. But the potential is certainly there.
I would just say, I know, as a former dean of education, the approach that Conmigo takes to supporting students is not well understood or able to be practiced by many teachers. I could see a wonderful another stream, which is teacher education. Yeah. On how Khan Academy approaches the whole idea of student support, not giving the answer, but cultivating the curiosity of how to get to the answer. So I would just say that would be a wonderful project, and maybe we have people who I think would be very interested in doing that, particularly in India or other places. So I want to say thank you so much for your time, and I want to say congratulations on the wonderful work you all are doing. It's made a real difference in a lot of people's lives, including my grandchildren. So thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me, and enjoy the conference.